The axe split the oak cleanly, its sharp crack swallowed by the roar of a blizzard rolling across the Colorado timberline. Leah raised the blade again. Then she saw the blood. A dark red trail stained the snow beside the pine forest, winding toward her barn before disappearing beneath the warped wooden door. In any other winter survival story, she might have barred the house, banked the fire, and waited for daylight. But this was no distant tale. This was her land, her last shelter, and perhaps the final quiet night she would ever know. She tightened both hands around the axe and crossed the yard. The barn door groaned open. A Colt revolver clicked in the darkness, its black muzzle aimed between her eyes. The man behind it was not standing. He had collapsed against a stack of wheat sacks, one shoulder pressed into the boards, blood soaking the left side of his coat. His breath came in ragged clouds. The hand holding the weapon trembled, though his finger remained against the trigger. "Do not make a sound," he said. His voice was raw with cold and pain. "Not if you want to live." Leah recognized him. Cade was the most hunted man in the territory, a wrongfully accused fugitive carrying a murder charge and a reward large enough to turn neighbors into hunters. Yet the danger before her looked less like a killer than a man already losing his fight with death. She did not scream. She did not step back. The axe remained steady at her side. Leah knew Cade had not committed the murder. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then, the strength left his arm. The revolver slipped from his fingers and struck the frozen floor. Cade folded beside it without another word. Outside, hounds began barking through the storm. Hooves pounded beyond the trees, growing louder as riders followed the blood toward her property. Leah looked down at the unconscious man, then toward the white darkness beyond the door. This Western frontier survival romance began with no promise of tenderness, only a choice. She could surrender Cade and protect the last home her family possessed, or hide him and become the next enemy of a corrupt town. The hounds were almost at the yard. While a wounded fugitive hides beneath her floor, Leah must face the man who has turned the law into an instrument of fear. The cellar smelled of damp earth and rotting turnips. Leah had barely lowered Cade onto the packed ground and dragged the wooden hatch shut when a fist struck the front door hard enough to shake the walls. The wind tore it open before she could answer. Deputy Miller entered with 3 armed men behind him, bringing snow, whiskey, and the bitter scent of gun smoke into the cabin. A silver badge shone against his coat. Nothing else about him resembled the law. Leah stood beside the stove and watched the flames settle around the blackened logs. Miller removed his gloves, glanced around the room, and smiled as though he already owned it. "Hard night for a widow," he said. "We are hunting a mad animal. Have you seen Cade?" Leah lifted the coffee pot. The stream entering the tin cup remained steady, though her pulse struck against her ribs. Beneath the floorboards, Cade lay silent in the dark. Dust sifted down across his fevered face each time Miller shifted his boots. The truth was simple. On the night of the murder, Cade had been in Leah's yard repairing the rusted axle of her wagon. She could clear his name with a single sentence. She could also lose everything by speaking it. This was frontier corruption stripped of ceremony. Miller had killed a man, forged a debt, and used his badge to seize the family's logging rights. In his hands, Old West justice had become another weapon carried at the hip. "I have seen no one," Leah said. She pushed the coffee toward him. "There is only the storm." Miller drank without taking his eyes from her. Then steel flashed. His knife struck the table and buried itself in the wood, pinning down a crumpled witness summons. "Court convenes at noon tomorrow," he said. "You will testify against Cade." He leaned close enough for Leah to smell stale liquor on his breath. "Winters burn cold out here. Houses burn warm. Bah." The threat was not meant to frighten her into silence. It was meant to force her into a lie. Miller pulled the knife free and left with his men. Hooves faded into the storm until the cabin became still again. Leah looked at the summons, then at the narrow seams between the floorboards. Below her, the wrongfully accused fugitive waited without moving. By hiding Cade, She had already crossed the line Miller had drawn for her. By morning, silence would no longer be enough. By morning, Cade understands that the widow who saved him is already fighting a war of her own. The blizzard weakened before dawn, leaving a pale sky above the Colorado timberline. Beneath the cabin, in a cellar thick with damp earth and spoiled turnips, Cade opened his eyes. Pain tore through his left side. The bullet wound had begun to fester, and each breath drove heat deeper into his ribs, through a crack in the floorboards. He watched Leah working in the yard. She stood beside an aging plow horse, bent over one lifted hoof as she reset an iron shoe. Wind struck her face. Her bare fingers had reddened and split against the metal, yet she never stopped to warm them. Cade had survived gunfights and border trails, but her quiet endurance unsettled him. This was more than a winter survival story. Leah had been under siege long before he crossed her threshold. Miller and the men behind him were taking her land piece by piece, hiding theft beneath papers, badges, and court orders. Footsteps crossed the frozen yard. Silas, Leah's uncle, came from the pines with his shoulders bowed. "They have taken it," he said. "Miller sealed the logging camp. He claims the murdered man's debt gives them the right." The hammer slipped from Leah's hand and disappeared into the snow. The logging camp was the last livelihood her family possessed. Now it had been stolen through frontier corruption. Cade understood then that he had not brought danger to a peaceful home. He had entered a house already marked for ruin. That night, after Leah fell asleep beside the stove, he dragged himself from the cellar. The stable door rattled loose in the wind, so he repaired its broken latch with hands made clumsy by fever. It was a small act. Yet in that silence, the first trace of a slow-burn Western romance took shape, built not from promises, but from work. Then Cade reached for his empty revolver and torn coat. He decided to leave before his presence cost Leah her life. He opened the door. A flaming arrow struck the wall beside his face. Fire spread across the dry oak boards. Miller's men had not come to wait for court. They had come to begin the killing. When warning shots tear through Leah's cabin, fear gives way to the first hard discipline of survival. Flames climbed the outer wall, throwing a red glare across the snow and the black pines beyond it. Cade struck the burning arrow with the butt of his revolver, snapping the shaft and smothering the fire before it could reach the roof. He did not look toward the forest for a path of escape. Leaving now would only hand Leah to the men who had already marked her as an enemy. Hooves circled the cabin. Miller's riders shouted through the dark, firing into the windows until glass burst across the floor. The attack was meant to break a witness before she ever reached the courtroom. Leah crouched behind the heavy table, breathing too quickly, both hands pressed against the boards. Cade crossed the room on one knee and placed an old Winchester rifle into her grasp. "There is no law here, Leah," he said. "Enduring this will not make them stop. Hold it." Gun smoke and lamp oil filled the narrow room. Cade moved behind her and closed his hands over hers, correcting the angle of the stock against her shoulder. His chest pressed against her back, steady despite the fever burning through him. "Do not close your eyes. Do not fire to frighten a man." His voice remained low beside her ear. "If someone comes to kill you, you fire to stop him." The lesson belonged to frontier survival, but the silence between them carried something more. Their trust had not been built through tenderness. It had been built through shelter, blood, and the knowledge that either one could still abandon the other. Leah raised the Winchester and chose not to hide. Her breathing slowed. The muzzle settled toward the dark shapes beyond the broken window. Before she pulled the trigger, the riders turned away. Their horses vanished among the pines, leaving only the ringing in her ears. Cade stepped outside. A wolf lay dead in the snow, its throat cut. Someone had dragged its blood into a long arrow pointing toward Silas's logging camp. This was no retreat. It was a message shaped by frontier corruption and delivered in blood. The true attack had never been aimed at Leah's cabin. It had been aimed at the last inheritance her family still possessed. Far beyond the trees, an orange glow began to rise against the winter sky. At the burning edge of the timber camp, Leah is forced to choose between the truth and the only family she has left. They drove their horses through the night, cutting across drifts toward the logging camp. They arrived too late. The last inheritance of Leah's family had become a field of fire. Beams collapsed into the snow with a hiss. Sparks rose through the smoke and vanished into the black sky. Silas was tied to an old pine near the ruins. His face was swollen from the beating, and blood ran from his mouth onto the snow. Leah dropped the reins and ran to him. Cade stopped beneath the trees. He could not step into the open without condemning them both. His hand closed around the grip of his empty revolver, while Miller's men laughed beside the burning timber. For a man accustomed to settling danger with violence, restraint became its own kind of punishment. Deputy Miller emerged from the smoke and pressed his pistol against Silas's temple. "The law can be severe," he said. "Your uncle was caught burning property the town had already seized. That offense carries a rope." The charge was another act of frontier corruption, but the badge on Miller's coat gave the lie a shape that frightened men into obedience. Leah stared at him. Her tears had dried in the heat, leaving soot across her face. Miller lowered the pistol and touched its barrel against her cheek. "Noon tomorrow. You will tell the court that you saw Cade commit the murder. Refuse, and you can stand beneath the gallows while your uncle hangs." Miller was no longer asking Leah to remain silent. He was ordering her to become part of the lie. His men cut Silas from the tree only to drag him toward their horses. The old man's boots carved 2 broken lines through the ash and snow. Leah remained on her knees until the riders disappeared. Then Ed stepped from the pines. This was no longer a simple logging camp conflict, and it was no longer only the story of a wrongfully accused fugitive. Miller had placed Leah's family, land, and conscience on the same scale. If she saved Silas with false testimony, Cade would die. If she spoke the truth, Miller would hang the man who had raised her. The fire settled behind them. Neither Leah nor Cade spoke. There was nothing left to say that would make the choice smaller. By dawn, they would have to decide what they were willing to lose. In the frozen silence of the cabin, Leah and Cade stopped waiting for mercy and prepared to pay the price of truth. The Colorado night pressed against the cabin walls with a cold sharp enough to split old timber. Inside, the silence felt even harder. The fire at the logging camp had burned away Leah's final hope of returning to the life she once knew. There would be no more pretending that patience could protect her home, or that obedience could soften men like Miller. Under the weak glow of a storm lantern, she opened the cylinder of her father's worn revolver and cleaned the rust from each chamber. Her hands had spent years kneading dough, chopping wood, and mending harness. Now they smelled of gun oil and iron. Across the table, Cade watched without speaking. From the inside pocket of his torn coat, he drew a scratched silver coin, the last keepsake from his years along the frontier. He set it on the cracked boards and pushed it toward her. It was not payment, it was a pledge. Leah looked at the coin, then at him. Instead of taking it, she reached across the table and closed her fingers around his scarred hand. The touch was cold, brief, and stronger than any vow. In that quiet gesture, their slow-burn Western romance became something neither of them needed to name. They had no promise of safety, no plan beyond dawn, and no guarantee that either would return. Leah chose to stand beside the man the town intended to kill. Cade tightened his hand around hers once, then let go. Gray light entered through the broken window. Morning had come. He lifted his revolver, opened the cylinder, and slid his final cartridge into place. The click sounded small in the room, but final. This was Old West justice, stripped of judges, badges, and speeches. It was 2 wounded people riding toward a town that had already decided what truth was worth. They pulled on their coats and stepped outside. 2 horses waited in the snow, their breath rising in pale clouds. By leaving the cabin together, Leah and Cade accepted that there would be no road back to the lives they had known. They mounted and rode toward town. Inside a crowded frontier courtroom, Leah must decide whether fear will speak for her or whether the truth will finally have a voice. The courthouse was packed shoulder to shoulder, thick with tobacco smoke, sour sweat, and barley whiskey. Conversation died when Leah entered through the doors. Every face turned toward her. The widow crossed the room beneath the weight of a town that had chosen its answer. These people did not want truth. They wanted a name to blame, a body to condemn, and a verdict that would make the theft of land and timber appear lawful. Deputy Miller leaned against the wall with his arms folded. His smile carried the certainty of a man who believed fear had already won. Silas remained under guard, close enough to the gallows for Leah to understand the bargain. One false statement might save her uncle. One honest answer might place the rope around his neck. She climbed the steps to the witness stand. Her worn dress brushed the rail. Her breathing came too fast, but she kept her hands at her sides. She was not alone. In the darkest corner of the courtroom, beneath a battered, wide-brimmed hat, Cade stood among the crowd like a man returned from the dead. His eyes never left Miller. One hand remained hidden inside his coat, resting near the grip of his revolver. The sight of him did not make Leah feel safe. It reminded her that he had come despite the wound, the reward, and the certainty of capture. Cade had chosen to risk his life so Leah would not face Miller alone. The judge struck his gavel 3 times. Court is now in session. His voice rolled across the room with the hollow authority of Old West justice bought and paid for. Miller tapped one finger against his holster. The gesture was small, but Leah understood it as clearly as a spoken threat. The judge leaned forward. On the night of the murder, did you see Cade? The room held its breath. This was the moment at the heart of their Western frontier survival romance, stripped of tenderness and reduced to one impossible choice. A lie could preserve Silas's life. The truth could destroy everything Miller still controlled. Leah closed her eyes for 1 second. Outside, winter wind scraped against the glass. Then she opened them. Leah's testimony shatters the town's silence, and Miller answers the truth with the only authority he has ever trusted. Leah opened her eyes. Fear had burned itself out. What remained was a stillness sharper than the winter beyond the courthouse walls. "No," she said. Her voice carried through the room before the judge could lift his gavel. "Cade did not kill that man. He was at my home that night." A murmur rolled through the crowd, then broke into shouting. Leah did not turn toward them. She raised one hand and pointed directly at Deputy Miller. "He killed the man. He forged the debt and used it to steal my family's logging camp." The lie protecting Miller collapsed in front of the entire town. His smile vanished. For one heartbeat, the badge on his coat looked small and useless. Then his hand dropped to his revolver. The shot struck the witness stand, tearing oak from the rail where Leah had been standing. Screams filled the courthouse as people overturned benches and fought toward the doors. Cade moved from the shadowed corner. He heaved a heavy table onto its side and drove forward behind it. 2 of Miller's men reached for their weapons. Cade fired before either could take aim, dropping them beside the benches. The room filled with smoke, splintered wood, and the bitter proof of frontier corruption exposed without disguise. Cade reached Leah and pulled her behind a row of seats. His final shot cut past Miller's head and forced the deputy toward the side door. Then the revolver clicked empty. Miller heard it. He seized Silas from the guards, locked one arm around the old man's throat, and pressed his pistol against his ribs. "You came here to play the hero?" Miller called. "Follow me into the pines. We will see whether you can hide faster than a bullet can reach his heart." Cade had cleared Leah from the line of fire, but he no longer had a loaded weapon with which to save Silas. Miller dragged the old logger through the side door and disappeared into the snowfall. The struggle for Old West justice had left the courtroom behind. Now the wrongfully accused fugitive and the widow who defended him would have to finish the fight in the winter forest. In the frozen forest, Leah turns the land she knows into their only weapon, while Cade closes the distance with nothing but a knife. The old pine forest stood buried beneath heavy snow, silent except for the brittle crunch of boots breaking through thin ice. Cade and Leah followed the drops of Silas's blood deeper between the trees. There was no perfect cover here. Every trunk could hide a gunman, and every open patch of snow could become a killing ground. This was no polished tale of frontier glory. It was frontier survival at its barest. 3 wounded people, 1 frightened killer, and no law close enough to matter. "I will take the left," Leah whispered. The forest had been part of her life for years. She knew where the ground dipped beneath the drifts, where roots twisted under the snow, and which slopes carried sound farther than sight. Cade nodded and drew his hunting knife. His revolver was empty. He moved right, bent low beneath the dark branches. Ahead, Miller dragged Silas through the trees. The deputy's breath came hard, and his pistol shifted from shadow to shadow. The man who had ruled through frontier corruption now looked hunted by every movement around him. A branch cracked on the hillside. Leah had broken it with both hands, releasing a burden of loose snow into the wind. The white cloud struck Miller across the face and blinded him. He fired toward the sound. Leah had created the only opening Cade would receive. Cade came from the opposite side and drove his shoulder into Miller's ribs. Silas fell clear as both men crashed into the snow. Cade struck first. His knife entered Miller's forearm, forcing the deputy's grip to loosen around the revolver. Miller fought back in panic. Blood covered his fingers as he reached for the weapon trapped between them. Then the gun discharged. The sound rolled through the pines and vanished into the winter distance. Cade went still. His hand slipped from Miller's throat, and the knife fell from his fingers. For one terrible moment, Leah could not tell which man had been hit. Then blood began spreading beneath them, bright against the snow. The fight for Old West justice had reached its final cost, but Leah still did not know who had paid it. Victory leaves no celebration in the winter pines, only blood, ash, and the hard promise of beginning again. Miller lay motionless beneath the gray sky, his eyes open to nothing. The revolver had discharged during the struggle, and the bullet meant for another man had ended the deputy's own life. Cade staggered backward and collapsed against an old pine. Blood spread across the front of his coat. Leah dropped the rifle and fell beside him. She did not cry out. The storm, the fire, and the long night had taken every useless tear from her. She tore a strip from her underskirt and pressed it against the wound with both hands. The same fingers that had kneaded bread, split kindling, and mended harness were soon covered in blood. Silas limped toward them through the snow. No townspeople came to cheer. No medal waited for the survivors of this Colorado frontier story. A raven called somewhere above the trees, and the forest answered with silence. They had exposed the murder and broken Miller's hold over the town, but survival carried a bitter cost. The logging camp had burned to the ground. Their bodies were marked by violence, and nothing could return them to the people they had been before the blizzard. Cade opened his eyes and found Leah still holding pressure against his chest. A faint smile touched his mouth. She wiped the black powder from his cheek with a hand stained by blood and mud. They had not won back the life that had been taken from them. They had only earned the right to build another one. Leah helped him stand. Silas stepped beneath Cade's other arm, and together they began the long walk out of the pines. Their western frontier survival romance ended no battle with glory. It left them wounded, nearly ruined, and bound together by choices neither could undo. They had kept their lives, their land, and one another. Beyond the forest waited a burned logging camp, a damaged cabin, and months of labor beneath an unforgiving sky. Yet for the first time, the work ahead belonged to them. In a true winter survival story, freedom was rarely warm or gentle. Sometimes it was nothing more than 3 exhausted people walking home through the snow, carrying enough strength to begin again.